The sky above was painted in hues of gold and bright colors as the village gathered to celebrate the 79th birthday of Mazi, one of the wealthiest men in the region. Gunshots cracked into the air. Cheers erupted and the native drums electrified the atmosphere, turning Mazi's birthday into a lively blaze of culture and celebration. Mazi, with his signature white beard and red cap, stood looking happily at the crowd. His face bore the wisdom of age, but his eyes sparkled with the mischief of a storyteller. Beside him were his 3 children, Adaeze, his firstborn daughter, standing tall and stately in a lace blouse and wrapper, her sharp features showing an air of authority. Kenneth, the first son, a broad-shouldered man with an arrogant demeanor, and Chimezie, the youngest, with a boyish charm. The festivities reached a crescendo when Mazi stood to address the crowd. "My people," Mazi began, his voice deep and resonant. "Today is not just a celebration of my years on this earth. It is also a moment to secure the legacy of the Ude family." A cheer ran through the crowd, but Mazi silenced it with a wave of his hand, and he said, "God has blessed me with plots of land scattered across the southeast, and also the massive shopping complex I have in Onitsha Main Market. But nothing beats the most precious gift of life. I am 79 years today, and I give God the glory. It pains me that my late wife is not here, as she has gone to be with the Lord, but I will always be grateful for the 3 children she gave me. My first child, Adaeze, Kenneth, my first son, and my last-born, Chimezie." The audience erupted in cheers and clapped happily, but among his children, the news landed differently. Adaeze's lips pursed into a thin line, Kenneth's jaw tightened, and Chimezie exchanged a wary glance with his wife, Nkiru. Mazi Ude's children were thinking about the land and properties their father just listed. Mazi continued addressing the crowd, oblivious to the storm brewing among his children. And he said to them, "The time has come for me to go and rest. Thank you all for coming to my birthday. God bless you." The crowd clapped for him, but his children were lost in thought, their faces marks of apprehension. Later that evening, as the festivities wound down, the siblings gathered in the living room. Adaeze was arrogantly talking to her siblings, and she said, "I hope you too don't think I'll be left out of this inheritance," she said, her tone sharp. "I have sacrificed just as much for this family." Kenneth scoffed and asked, "Sacrificed? Adaeze, you are married to a wealthy man, and you have no business with our father's properties. Don't start claiming sacrifices now." Adaeze's eyes flared with anger, and she said, "Kenneth, you have always thought you are entitled to everything just because you are the first son." "I am the first son," Kenneth retorted. "Tradition is clear. The bulk of the property belongs to me." Chimezie, ever the peacemaker, raised a hand. "Can we not fight? This isn't the time. Besides, Adaeze is right. She deserves something." Kenneth turned on his younger brother. "You are siding with her now. You of all people should know the weight of tradition. If she gets anything, it will be through charity, not entitlement." Adaeze's voice quivered with restrained fury. "Charity? Kenneth, I am your elder, and I demand to be respected." Kenneth laughed and said, "You earn respect, you don't demand it." Nkiru, Chimezie's wife, who had been listening quietly, whispered to her husband and said, "Chimezie, you can't let them push you aside. You are the last-born, yes, but you have worked hard for this family too." The tension in the room was palpable. They glared at one another until the air felt thick with unspoken words. Finally, Adaeze stood, her expression icy, and she said, "We will see who ends up with what." About 2 weeks after the birthday party, Mazi Ude collapsed in his room. The compound was thrown into chaos as villagers scrambled to get a doctor. By evening, Mazi Ude was in a hospital in Onitsha, unresponsive, his condition critical. In the hospital's waiting room, the siblings sat in silence, their earlier argument a heavy cloud over them, but it wasn't long before the cracks began to show. "Kenneth," Adaeze said, breaking the silence, "since you are so sure you will inherit everything, Why don't you pay for the hospital bills? Kenneth's nostrils flared and he said, Don't start, Adaeze. You are not the only one worried about Papa. Oh, please, Adaeze shot back. We all know what you are worried about. The lands, the shopping complex. That's all you care about. Chimezie sighed and said, Enough, both of you. Can't we focus on Papa's health? Adaeze glared at Chimezie and said, And you, Chimezie, don't think you will play the saints here. I see your wife always hovering around you like a vulture and whispering in your ear. She's just as greedy as the rest of us. Nkiru, offended, stood and said, Don't drag me into this. At least I have the decency to be by my husband's side. Unlike someone I know that dumps her family in Abuja and come all the way here to fight for lands and properties. Adaeze's face turned pale and she sparked. Do I take that as an insult? Take it in any way you like, Nkiru fired back. Before Adaeze could respond, a police officer entered the waiting room. Mr. Kenneth Ude. Kenneth stood, confused. Yes? You are under arrest, the police officer said, for drug trafficking. The hospital corridors erupted in chaos as Kenneth protested vehemently. This is a mistake. I have done nothing wrong. Adaeze watched in stunned silence as the officers handcuffed her brother and led him away. Chimezie's gaze flickered between his siblings, suspicion brewing, and he said, I hope you don't have a hand in this. He glared angrily at Adaeze. That night, as Kenneth languished in a cell, Chimezie confronted his sister in their family mansion. Tell me the truth, Chimezie demanded. Did you set Kenneth up? Adaeze hesitated, her facade cracking, and she replied, I had no choice. He was going to take everything. I have been sidelined all my whole life. Just because I am a woman. Chimezie, I won't let it happen again. Chimezie's expression was one of disbelief. Adaeze, this isn't the way. You are risking everything. Our family name, your own dignity. I don't care about dignity, Adaeze snapped. I care about justice. Women in our culture are treated like second-class citizens. I am fighting for what's mine. By destroying your own brother? Chimezie shook his head. You have gone too far. I mean, what is the end game here, Adaeze? The end game, Adaeze replied, is that while he is in cell, I can possess all the properties. When I am done with documenting the properties to my name, I will release him. Don't worry, Chimezie. I will give some of the lands to you. As Adaeze turned and walked away arrogantly, Chimezie made a silent vow. He would fight for his share, not out of greed, but to restore the balance to a family on a brink of ruin. Mazi Ude lay in a coma, his frail body tethered to the machines that hummed softly. Adaeze sat in a corner, her face pale, her eyes darting nervously. Her act of desperation, framing Kenneth for drug trafficking, had spiraled out of control. Guilt gnawed at her, but the sting of injustice that had fueled her action kept her defiance alive. In Igbo culture, women were often excluded from inheritance, a tradition she felt compelled to defy at any cost. Chimezie and Nkiru, his wife, were also standing beside Mazi at the hospital bed. Nkiru took her husband aside and whispered fiercely in his ear, urging him to stake his claim. Chimezie, this is your chance, she said. Kenneth is out of the way. He does not have a wife and no one to fight for him. But you have me. Let's work together and also get her, Adaeze, out of the picture, or you will end up with nothing but regrets. Chimezie frowned. His nature was peaceful, his heart inclined towards fairness, but the words of his wife lingered like a shadow over his thoughts. For years he had been overlooked because he was the last born. Now, with his family in chaos, he saw an opportunity to be finally heard. That evening, Kenneth sat in a dimly lit police cell, his mind racing. He replayed the events of the last few days, trying to make sense of how his life had unraveled so quickly. Who could have done this to me? He muttered under his breath. The answer gnawed at him, unspoken but clear. Adaeze, his elder sister, had always been strong-willed. But this was a betrayal he hadn't seen coming. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. A police officer opened the cell door, allowing a visitor to step in. It was Chimezie. Kenneth rose, his eyes narrowing. "What are you doing here, Chimezie?" "I was expecting my lawyer, but it's like you have come to laugh at me." "Don't be ridiculous," Chimezie replied. "I came to tell you that Adaeze, our elder sister, is behind this." Kenneth laughed bitterly. "I know she's desperate to get her hands on the land and properties, but framing me with drug trafficking, that's very low, even for her." Chimezie hesitated, then spoke. "Kenneth, listen, I don't agree with what she has done, but maybe we are all to blame. Papa hasn't even passed yet, and we're already tearing each other apart. Look at us. What would Papa think?" Kenneth sighed, his anger momentarily giving way to a bang of regrets. "You are right. We have lost sight of what matters. But first, we need to clear my name. Can you help me?" Chimezie nodded. "I will do everything within my power." Meanwhile, Adaeze sat in the hospital corridors. The weight of her actions bore down on her. She thought of her father, lying helpless in a hospital bed, and the shame of what she has done burned deep in her chest. "I did this for justice," she whispered to herself, trying to justify her actions. Women deserve their share too. But the voice in her head wouldn't let her rest. Justice or greed? Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. It was a call from the corrupt police officer she had paid off. "Madam, we have a problem," the officer said. "Your brother Kenneth is fighting back. His lawyer is poking holes in the evidence. If this continues, the truth might come out." Adaeze's blood ran cold. "Handle it," she backed, her voice trembling. "Do whatever it takes. He can't walk free." Chimezie, true to his word, began working to clear Kenneth's name. He visited the police station with a lawyer who dismantled the fabricated case against Kenneth. Bit by bit, the lies unraveled. The officers who had conspired with Adaeze began to feel the heat, and one of them cracked under pressure, confessing that the entire case was a setup. Kenneth was released the next day, his face grim but determined. "This isn't over," he said to Chimezie as they walked out of the station. "Adaeze has to face the consequences." Back at the hospital, the tension reached a boiling point. The three siblings found themselves in the same room for the first time since Kenneth's arrest. Kenneth and Adaeze were going hard at each other right there in the hospital room where their dad lay in coma. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Kenneth demanded, his voice cold. Adaeze glared at her brother Kenneth and said, "Yes, I did what I did because I was fighting for my rights." The both of them were shouting at the top of their voices when they heard a loud shout from Mazi Ude. "Enough!" The siblings froze, their father's sudden awakening silencing them. "Papa," Adaeze began, but Mazi raised a hand and said, "I have been awake long enough to hear your bickering," he said, his voice frail but firm. "Is this what I have raised you to become? Vultures circling a living man?" The siblings hung their head in shame. Mazi continued, his voice rising with anger. "Adaeze, my daughter, I have heard what you did. Framing your brother, betraying your family. Have I taught you nothing?" Adaeze broke down, tears streaming down her face. "Papa, I was desperate. Women in our culture are denied inheritance. I thought you would leave me with nothing." Mazi shook his head. Disappointment etched into his features, and he said, "And so you let greed consume you, Adaeze, I never intended to deny you anything. I wrote a will long ago, ensuring that all of you would be treated fairly. But you were so blinded by greed. None of you bothered to inquire if I actually have a will. The room fell silent, the weight of Mazi's words pressing down on them. A week after Mazi Ude was discharged from the hospital, he summoned his lawyers to read his will. As promised, the will was fair. Adaeze was granted a share of land and a portion of the shopping complex profits, while Kenneth and Chimezie each received their rightful shares. But the damage had already been done. The siblings could barely look at each other, the wounds of their greed still fresh. Adaeze, facing legal repercussions for her actions, broke down in tears. I am sorry, she said to Kenneth. I let my fear and anger drive me to do terrible things. I never meant to hurt you. Kenneth, though still hurt, nodded. We have all made mistakes. Let's learn from them and move on. Chimezie, ever the mediator, placed a hand on Adaeze and said, Papa is right. We have lost sight of what matters. It's not the land or the money. It's us. We are family. Mazi Ude looked at his children and said, Greed is a disease, my children. It blinds us to what truly matters. Never let material things come between you again. Land can be lost. Money can vanish. But family is irreplaceable. The siblings nodded, their father's words sinking deep into their hearts. The tale of Mazi Ude and his children became a cautionary story in the village. It was a reminder that greed and materialism could tear even the strongest families apart. But love and unity could heal even the deepest wounds. And so, few years later, the Ude's family were united as they have learned to value what truly mattered, ensuring that Mazi's legacy was not one of wealth, but of wisdom and togetherness.